On the 76th floor of the royal capital's dungeon, a warrior's horn sounded, warning his comrades of danger. At the same moment, a nearby two-headed dragon erupted in flames, illuminating the stone vaults with fiery light and turning the surrounding space into a scorching trap. Then, one of his comrades called out loudly to Jin, demanding to know if he was finally ready to engage. In response, he apologized for the delay and tightened his grip on the hilt of his blade, standing against the raging fire as if about to step straight into the beast's jaws. Afterwards, he quickly surveyed the squad and asked if everyone was safe. One of the wounded soldiers immediately raised his palm, indicating that he was still alive and able to continue fighting despite his burns and fatigue. Meanwhile, the man in the headband enthusiastically praised the swordsman, declaring that this was exactly the result he expected. He congratulated him on his success, while Jin himself, feeling the tension in every muscle, merely exhaled heavily, trying to maintain his composure. Then Dylan's strength surfaced in his memory, and with it the image of King Ghidorah, whose might evoked both awe and a shudder. These thoughts involuntarily compelled him to compare his own achievements to those of true titans. Afterwards, he doubted whether their intervention was truly necessary, as such a blow seemed impossible for a mere human. However, Shuna confirmed that the three opponents were of the elite class, and she wondered aloud whether the country's strongest swordsman could have handled it alone. Meanwhile, the hero himself, feeling sweat trickle down his back, acknowledged to himself that their current enemy was even more terrifying than the previous ones. Deep down, he knew before them stood a being superior to all previous threats. Then Shuna tried to defuse the situation and told him not to worry about trifles. She asked if his lover would be coming to see him today, and then advised him to hurry home. In response, he allowed himself a slight smile and asked her not to fuss. Later, as he sat apart, fatigue finally caught up with him. He confessed that he had met someone he had feelings for, emphasizing that he was an ordinary citizen, far removed from the world of battles and heroic deeds. But then a disturbing thought flashed through his mind. His beloved had suddenly disappeared from the house. He clutched the object at hand, realizing that this disappearance might be connected to his own fate. Soon, someone he knew decided to reveal the truth and confess that he'd always been afraid of him, after which he apologized. These words came as a surprise, but they were genuine. Then he remembered that the girl had never raised her voice before and, like the others, was looking at him with apprehension. At that moment, Shuna quietly called his name, as if trying to bring him back to reality. Gradually, he came to understand. His excessive power had alienated him from ordinary people and changed his position in the world. He was no longer part of the familiar circle, but had become a figure evoking awe and fear. After this, he straightened up and drew his sword, declaring that it was he who had destroyed the dragon that adventurers across the country had been unable to deal with, and he had done so with a single blow. And yet, feeling the gazes of those around him, he mentally acknowledged that he frightened them. In their eyes, he was not a hero, but something else, a being beyond human comprehension. Later, he recalled how, in the heat of battle, he had gradually changed, as if becoming a monster himself. He also honestly admitted to himself that the Dragon King had seemed a weak opponent. His journey didn't initially begin with a thirst for power. Back then, he sought only to survive. Strength became a byproduct of his desperate struggle for existence. As time went on, he mercilessly cut down the monsters one by one, and then shook hands with the man in black, joining the S-rank team, while the surrounding people watched with restraint and caution. It was after one swift swing of the blade, when no one could even discern the trace of the blow, that he acquired the nickname Traceless. Those who saw the result but missed the movement began calling him that. By that point, almost all of his comrades, except Dylan, were already keeping their distance. Two figures stood under the spotlights, one awkwardly scratching the back of his head, the other confidently gesturing, while he realized how alone he had become at the height of his power. Visibly depressed, he seriously considered quitting his adventure. Then his companion reminded him that he was the lead attacker on the S-rank team and gently asked if that wasn't his true calling. Jin lowered his gaze and admitted he'd reached his limit internally. He said his physical strength was still intact, but his mind could no longer withstand the constant strain. After that, he quietly reflected and added that his feelings remained unclear, as if hidden by a fog, but despite all this, he was sure that the potential had not yet been exhausted and he was capable of becoming stronger. Nevertheless, a contradiction was brewing within him. If he continued down his current path, those around him would finally stop seeing him as a human being. Then, he feared, he would become nothing more than a monster to everyone. After a pause, he calmly asked her what she would do if she too decided to give up adventure one day. There was no reproach in his voice, only genuine curiosity. Later, he was rummaging through the shelves when another man told him to go home. He was surprised to hear this order and asked if he had understood it correctly. Meanwhile, the boy asked if this was his house, but his interlocutor firmly denied it, clutching a large bundle under his arm. The answer came without hesitation, as if the question were unnecessary. Then he declared decisively that he was returning to Dagar. His gaze was fixed ahead, on the desert landscape, and his determination was clear. Jin confirmed that Dagar was his hometown, even though he no longer had any family. He pointed to the cafe his grandfather once owned, and the bright sun illuminated the abandoned street. Later, sitting quietly and snacking on a sandwich, he admitted that he was a very mediocre cook. When asked if he had ever been able to cook, he replied that he was only looking for a temporary break from the adventurer's life. He then assured his interlocutor that nothing had changed between them and that he remained her friend. He would always be glad to return if needed, and in response, he received a quiet thank you. After that, he promised to visit the cafe one day, and Shuna enthusiastically declared that she would definitely treat him to a variety of delicious dishes. Her words were filled with genuine determination. Soon, Jin stopped in front of Café Dagar, looking out at its facade in the bright sun. The sword on his back was a reminder of his past, but he seemed about to step through the door in a different role. He noticed the door was unlocked and was surprised by this. He then called out to someone inside, informing them that the cafe wasn't officially open yet. When he introduced himself as the owner's grandson, his voice sounded slightly tense. However, his interlocutor interrupted him, admitting that he had been taken by surprise. Then an elderly man named Grandpa Pobek greeted him warmly at Herod's shop and extended his hand for a handshake. The reception was much warmer than he expected. Later, Jin, sitting down with his backpack on his back, thanked them for everything they'd done for him. Meanwhile, Shuna opened the window, letting in a fresh breeze, and apologized for the draft. Afterwards, he remarked with a hint of mockery that someone had been making some rather worthy speeches lately. He smiled confidently, and his interlocutor responded with a loud laugh. He then told the older man that he had retired from his adventurer career and was now considering reopening the cafe to rethink his life. His words conveyed a yearning for a new beginning. Finally, the older, turbaned interlocutor thoughtfully noted that the adventurer's craft wasn't meant to last forever. He agreed that the decision to change paths seemed reasonable and timely. Jin raised his eyebrows in surprise when he was handed an envelope with the words, "Here you go." He tilted his head slightly, trying to figure out what was inside and why they were handing it to him now. It soon became clear that the message was from his late grandfather. The elderly man explained that the letter had been kept in case his grandson ever returned to his native Dagar. Afterwards, he silently mopped the floor, the lines from the letter echoing in his head. They asked if he was happy, if he was too tired, if he could enjoy his meal in peace, and, above all, wished for his well-being. He then picked up a small barrel and a plate, continuing to reread the lines. The letter said that if he was holding it now, it meant he had returned to Dagar for a reason, and that home could become a starting point for rethinking his life. Later, the elderly owner, standing on a stepladder with a mop in his hand, announced that he was leaving the cafe to him for a specific purpose. His words sounded serious, as if it were not just a decision, but a will. Meanwhile, the cafe building in the mountains looked quiet and almost abandoned. The narrative noted that if anyone decided to manage the place again, they would have to breathe new life into it. After this, a promise was made to reveal the secret recipe for the Iba family's signature autumn dish. A secret guarded for generations, it was now ready to be passed on to the heir. A thin crescent moon rose over the mountain known as Back Mountain. A building was barely visible in the foreground, as if shrouded in the shadow of impending change. Further warnings were issued that the dark cave in the rocky mountain was forbidden to approach, as monsters were known to appear there. The warning was passed from mouth to mouth, fueling the fear of the locals. Then Jin revealed the truth. The Iba family had secretly controlled this dungeon for generations. He spotted the entrance to the dungeon and hesitated, as if deciding whether to continue the explanation. After a pause, he asked for a little time, explaining that he had only recently returned home and was trying to become a normal person. He wanted to live peacefully, at least for a little while. However, upon further reflection, he acknowledged that the dungeon was deadly, even though it promised enormous rewards. He repeated to himself that the risk was great, as if trying to convince himself to stay away. Nevertheless, the text stated that the dungeon granted the brave what they most desired. This is precisely what made it so attractive to those seeking power. Sitting at the table with a sheet of paper in his hands, he began to ponder his own desires. The silence around him heightened the weight of these thoughts. He soon admitted to himself that he craved a true challenge and a proper chance to become faster and stronger. His hand gripped the hilt of his sword tightly, as if the decision was already brewing within him. Later, he received praise, and someone remarked that his efforts were sometimes excessive. In response, he suggested that next time everyone try harder, maintaining a common spirit. He then dismissed talk of danger, dismissing the dungeon as merely a remote cavern with mediocre rewards. With a confident gesture, he dismissed the idea of Chan returning to his former exploits. After this, Jin firmly declared that he had already retired from adventure. He added that hunting edible monsters for food was still acceptable, but nothing more. When Shuna asked if she could stay the night, he leaned against the counter and reminded her that this was, after all, a cafe. His questioning gaze made his doubts clear. In response, the hand pointed to a handwritten note listing expenses: accommodation, 3,000 ghetto, drinks, 300 ghetto. And so, the conversation about lodging immediately took on a completely business-like tone. Jin noticed that the sign and menu remained the same, as if time had stood still, but the inn itself was closed. Shuna then asked if there were any rooms available despite this. He calmly assured her that although there were people in the area, he was the only one in the building right now. He then asked if she was afraid to stay, but she looked at him evenly and confidently, betraying no alarm. After this, the girl clutched her scarf tighter, trying to hide the trembling in her fingers, and quietly insisted that she wasn't afraid at all. However, her hands still betrayed the tension within. Meanwhile, a scorpion crawled across the deserted landscape near the house. Someone's voice remarked that spending the night outdoors would be much worse. Hearing this, Jin smiled softly and admitted that he himself felt no fear. Deep down, he was thinking how strange it was to return to a calm life after everything he had been through. Then Shuna, holding her sword resolutely, was surprised when she was offered a guest room on the second floor, with the warning of accumulated dust. The situation seemed both awkward and unexpected. Later, she quietly said goodnight, handing him the key. He waved cheerfully in response and also said goodnight, trying to make the moment lighter. After that, he confidently announced that he was leaving for his business, and his posture was determined. He seemed ready to take the next step without hesitation. Soon, Jin stood at the entrance to the cave and firmly declared that he remained a true adventurer. If there was a dungeon hidden within, he intended to explore it. He thought that since the dungeon was located on his land, as the manager, he was obliged to at least check on its condition once. This thought seemed reasonable and justified to him. As soon as he stepped inside, he noticed that everything inside resembled the entrance to an ordinary residential building. The furnishings seemed too neat for a dangerous dungeon. However, he soon scratched his head and asked in surprise why she had followed him. Shuna stood nearby, her arms crossed, her expression hidden. She then explained that she had seen him sneaking out of the house at night, fully equipped, and had become suspicious. She claimed she had decided the hotel might be a cover for kidnappings and intended to catch the perpetrator. Shuna looked around and noticed that it was indeed a dungeon. He briefly confirmed her conclusion, saying she was right. She then calmly added that she didn't sense any monsters in the room. However, Jin immediately warned her to leave, reminding her of the danger, to which she doubted that was true. After that, the girl noticed a strange slab and asked what it was. He called out to her from behind as if to warn her. The device's screen displayed information: dungeon type wasteland, level 3. 2 contenders were also listed: Jin Aiba and Shuna Payet. Seeing this, he asked in surprise who the other participant was. She calmly explained that the device displayed information about the dungeon and those who had entered it. Her stats then appeared: high agility, powerful magical attack, and strong defense, but extremely low cooking skills. This contrast was unexpected. Jin was surprised to see that her magic and defense stats were astonishingly high, even surpassing his own despite her status as an S-rank adventurer. He studied the readings on the screen carefully, his gaze becoming focused. He admitted he'd never seen such high readings before, while Shuna, clearly stunned, nervously asked who he really was. Meanwhile, Jin looked at his own stats in confusion. His strength, agility, stamina, attack, and defense were all astonishingly high. However, his intelligence and culinary skills seemed unexpectedly low, creating a strange contrast. Afterwards, Shuna couldn't hide her shock and declared that such figures were simply absurd. Her voice betrayed genuine disbelief at what she had seen. He flushed in response when she mockingly mentioned his intelligence level. The girl merely smiled smugly, relishing how easily she'd managed to offend him. He then pointed to her culinary index of -24 and, clearly perplexed, demanded an explanation. She immediately flushed and told him to shut up, not wanting to discuss such a sensitive topic. Afterwards, she sharply declared that looking at someone else's body without permission was inappropriate and called him perverted. He quickly retorted that she had done the same, though his voice was less confident. Then he firmly declared that he intended to explore the place alone and invited her to return. She listened to him silently, her gaze fixed on him gravely. But then the girl merely snorted and declared that everything was under control. Her tone conveyed confidence, as if she were in no danger at all. A little later, she admitted she couldn't sleep and decided to help. He noted that her argument sounded rather selfish, but didn't argue further. After these words, she stepped toward the entrance to the dungeon and calmly noted that everything looked quite normal. He watched her from behind, in no hurry to intervene. Jin thought her numbers might seem modest compared to his. However, by monster standards, her abilities were truly impressive. Then it occurred to him that even if he used only a fraction of his power, the monsters would hardly be afraid. The idea of frost restraint seemed reasonable. Soon they both stopped, looking out over the endless plains within Rocky Mountain. He couldn't hide his amazement, and she suggested they might have been transported to another dimension using spatial magic. Afterwards, he introduced himself and suggested they at least remember each other's names as partners. In response, she confidently asked him not to become a burden to her. Shuna then declared that her own fist would be more than enough, as she was only at level 3. Her words rang with utter conviction. Then, Jean enthusiastically noted that she was 3 times stronger than Dylan. He added that he expected such impressive results from her. She asked in surprise who Dylan was, and he explained that he was his comrade, an S-rank adventurer from the royal capital and a member of the team. After this, the girl turned away and coldly declared that she did not wish to be compared to some imposter. Her posture was filled with pride. A little later, she quietly admitted that she felt like she was at the very bottom of an abyss every day. Her words sounded unexpectedly sincere. Jin repeated the word abyss thoughtfully, as if tasting it. However, she dismissed it abruptly, declaring it nonsense while he continued to watch her, not rushing to conclusions. He thought about the abyss, the secret dungeon beneath the Temple of Gon, where only select priests and knights undergo training. Then it became clear to him that her strength was entirely understandable if she too had trained there. Jin reminded her that the dungeon's existence was to remain a secret. She confidently assured him that she knew how to keep her mouth shut, to which he merely responded with a short, surprised exclamation. Afterwards, he noted with a hint of mockery that, despite her appearance, she seemed quite reserved. His playful expression clearly betrayed the teasing. Shuna responded with a sharp warning that she might hit him. He immediately raised his hand in defense and looked at her in surprise. Then he confidently declared that she shouldn't expect to defeat him in combat. She concentrated and took a stance, not intending to retreat. After a moment, Jin wondered if he'd gone too far. Shuna looked down and quickly told him he'd misunderstood. But then she suddenly announced that she was going to obliterate him with a powerful spell. He reacted in shock, not even having time to finish. The next second, he sharply dodged the attack, determined to avoid it at all costs. The danger was too real to lose his concentration. Meanwhile, she shouted that she would seal him with a barrier. He tried to break through the spell's pressure, gritting his teeth in pain. Afterwards, she anxiously asked if she'd killed him. Jin, however, was still standing and smilingly replied that he was alive, but asked her not to go that far. She declared that she would use resurrection if necessary. However, he reminded her that the likelihood of such magic being successful was extremely low, especially for a saint's disciple. Then the girl flushed at the address and rushed forward. He watched her movements from behind, feeling the tension build. He noted to himself that her blow was far more dangerous than King Ghidorah's. He even had to wonder when the last time he had seriously dodged something like that was. Jin noticed that the enemy was difficult to hit and advised her to twist her body more, adding magical feints. At the same time, he confidently noted that he hadn't yet reached full strength. On the contrary, the situation was becoming increasingly acute on his end. He continued to dodge the swift blows, amazed at their speed. She laughed and didn't slow down until she finally knocked him down. Then he enthusiastically declared that it was even fun. She responded with a determined look that belied her weariness. Soon, Jin noticed Shuna lying on the grass, completely exhausted and unable to continue. He calmly pointed out her situation, advising her to be more careful. She admitted with frustration that, in the end, she hadn't been able to land a single accurate blow. The words came through heavy breathing. Jin admitted it had taken a lot of effort to dodge. She confidently declared that next time she would definitely hit his arm, clenching her fist in determination. He quietly noted to himself that the next confrontation was bound to happen, and most importantly, she wasn't afraid at all. At this thought, a barely perceptible smile appeared on his lips. Jin surveyed the surroundings and explained that he'd only come for a quick check and that he had no provisions with him. Shuna, sitting down on the ground, complained of hunger and asked him to find something edible. He soon realized they had already reached the very depths of the dungeon. This realization was reflected in his focused gaze. Jin then praised her for her precise aim. She held the energy ball in her hand and looked ahead with complete concentration. Afterwards, he confidently declared that the meat he'd obtained was rich in protein, almost fat-free, and had an excellent taste, calling it a premium ingredient. She listened attentively, clearly not losing her resolve. Jin added that a typical blood cochin grows to about 2 meters in height, while this specimen is classified as a POS. Shuna merely echoed this with a brief, dubious remark. He then explained that in high-end restaurants, such a product is considered a true luxury and is sold at a hefty price. His words underscored the value of the find. Soon he prepared to strike at the large bird-like creature, raising his sword. Shuna watched tensely, her gaze never leaving the unfolding battle. After the blow, he confidently announced that tonight's dinner would be yakitori fried chicken skewers. There was genuine excitement in his voice. However, Jin then suddenly asked what would happen if he died. Shuna calmly replied that she would use resurrection, adding that, as expected, he was unharmed. A moment later, he noticed that all the meat had been blown apart by the blast, and regretfully emphasized how valuable it had been. She silently watched the smoke rising into the sky. A devastated battlefield lay before them, devoid of any remaining monsters. Jin explained that the low-level bosses were simply enlarged, weaker creatures blown away by the shockwave before admitting he'd overdone it a bit. They then stopped in front of a large altar with a stone statue of a chicken. He explained that completing the labyrinth meant completing the dungeon. Shuna enthusiastically pointed to the treasure chest. Jin warned her not to get her hopes up, as the reward for level 3 was unlikely to be exceptional. She finally opened the chest and admitted that she understood his words, but she couldn't resist hoping. Curiosity proved stronger than reason. Soon Shuna was looking at the magic scroll with surprise, and Jin, noticing the find, exclaimed joyfully, calling it real luck. He explained that anyone could activate magic simply by reading a scroll, and even weak spells were expensive. She wondered, surprised, if they'd stumbled upon something rare. They bent over the scroll together, which depicted a cup and the word delicious. She looked determined, and he studied the details carefully. However, he then noted incredulously that the reward was merely a cooking recording. Shuna calmly asked what was so special about the coffee recipe after all that effort. Yet Jin suddenly realized he didn't know how to brew coffee properly, despite his intention to open a cafe. At that moment, the recipe seemed like a true treasure. He confidently explained to the old man that the dungeon grants adventurers exactly what they seek. If you complete it, you can even obtain food or rare recipes, as the dungeon seems to read the wishes of those who challenge it. Shuna immediately suggested that he make coffee upon his return, since they now had the recipe. Jin smiled and agreed, as if he could already imagine the aroma of a freshly brewed drink. However, he then admitted that the beans weren't ready yet. She was surprised and didn't hide her disbelief, wondering how he was even going to call this place a cafe. In response, Jin quickly clarified that the establishment hadn't opened yet and asked them to wait until tomorrow. Shuna nodded and asked what menu he planned to offer his customers. Then he began passionately explaining that in the desert, water is a rare luxury, and even plain water, properly infused with something, can be considered a treasure. She listened calmly, unimpressed. After that, Jin suddenly asked if they even had iced water. Shuna irritably remarked that she'd prefer something with real flavor. He immediately and hastily suggested sugar water and even salt water, saying this with complete seriousness. His face betrayed the conviction that these were worthy options. Shuna looked at him with a dark shadow on her face and asked sharply if he considered himself a genius. Then she firmly ordered him to shut up. Meanwhile, Jin noted with relief that they had managed to find the blood cochin eggs after all. This seemed a worthy result of their expedition. Later, he carried a tray of dishes, and Shuna, slightly embarrassed, admitted that it had taken until midnight to prepare. Fatigue was palpable in every movement. She then loudly warned him not to dare touch the eggs before her, threatening to kill him. After that, they exchanged goodnight wishes, and he decided to go to bed. As he was getting ready to go to bed, he noted that he had originally only intended to explore the dungeon, but ended up going through it entirely because the monsters were too weak. Jin lay back with a slight smile, thinking that, despite everything, this was actually quite pleasant. There was a sense of calm in these thoughts. Meanwhile, the merciless ultraviolet rays were once again pouring down over the Gorda desert. He wondered if, with luck, they might be able to sell water to travelers. In the morning, Jin tapped his finger confidently on the tabletop and recited the well-known saying about striking while the iron is hot. His gaze was determined. He clenched his fists and announced that Café Dagar would be opening today. The menu board was already visible behind him. Shuna sleepily wished him good morning as he poured the drink. He cheerfully returned the greeting, as if the new day promised change. A moment later, feeling hungry, she leaned on the table and politely asked for breakfast. There was hope in her voice. She asked about the morning menu, and Jin informed her that today they would be serving bloody cochin eggs, left over from yesterday. Finally, he asked her what was considered the most delicious way to cook eggs. She merely frowned and admitted she had no idea how to cook them properly. Shuna insisted that he handle the cooking himself, since he was taking on the role of chef. Jin explained that in an adventurer's party, a dedicated chef was always responsible for the kitchen, so his own skills in the matter were quite limited. Then she looked at him intently and asked if he'd ever helped out at home at the stove. Her gaze demanded an immediate answer. Then the girl flushed and declared that she herself never had time for such activities. He watched her calmly from behind, not interfering with her outburst. He merely noted that, given such outstanding performance in other areas, such gaps were possible. She crossed her arms and repeated that she simply didn't have time for such trivialities. After that, Jin confidently suggested limiting herself to fried eggs, assuring her he could handle it. She asked in surprise, as if she doubted even such a simple idea. Then Shuna quietly added that she could probably handle such a dish herself. Her words were filled with cautious but unmistakable confidence. At that moment, a man on a camel rode up to the cafe and called out loudly to Jin, asking if he was still asleep. A building with windows and a tiled roof was visible in the background. Jin threw a few eggs in her direction, and she, recognizing the voice, noted that it was Pobik from Harap's shop. The situation became hectic. She tried to catch the falling eggs, crying out in fear and asking them to wait. Several nearly slipped from her hands. Shuna, clutching her prize, nervously agreed to make breakfast when he asked if she could make some eggs since he was hungry too. Meanwhile, Jin greeted Pobik cheerfully and inquired about the purpose of his visit. He then added that since he was now running the cafe, he might become a regular, and asked what he would like to order. Smiling and holding a pencil and notepad, he said he'd been thinking of ordering coffee beans and some bread. His tone was businesslike and reassuring. However, he suddenly cried out loudly in surprise, and the elderly man standing behind him looked at him with concern. Jin, tensing, covered his mouth with his hand and asked Shuna what had happened. His voice was filled with concern. She froze as the hot liquid splashed onto her face and clothes, her astonishment preventing her from reacting immediately. He, sweating and stunned, asked if the egg had really been fried with the shell still on. A heavy shadow seemed to loom in the back of the room, accentuating the tension. Jin quickly explained that eggs needed to be cracked before cooking. She sheepishly admitted she hadn't known this and thought it made no difference, then told him to shut up. He sighed and admitted he'd underestimated her extremely poor culinary skills, calling the incident a waste of ingredients. She stubbornly declared she'd simply return everything to its previous state. Jin was surprised to see that this was impossible, but then resigned himself to the situation, squatting down next to a wooden bucket to clean up the mess. Finally, he demanded an apology and added that he was willing to forgive her if she helped with the cleaning. He still looked tense and confused, however, and began to question what she was even trying to do next. He felt a strange vibration in the air and peered closely at the aura around her. It was holy magic, but the mana circulated chaotically, causing the space to seem to tremble. Jin realized with astonishment that she was using a resurrection spell. Shuna hovered calmly in the air as if such tension were familiar to her. Then she sharply demanded that I concentrate my will, and streams of energy gushed from her palms. Her face showed utter determination. The next second, Jin was stunned to notice that the eggs were showing signs of life again. 2 of them had already cracked, and chicks were emerging from the shells. He quickly calculated the results. Out of 6 attempts, 5 were successful, over 80% success rate compared to the usual 10. The numbers seemed incredible, and Shuna merely snorted with satisfaction. Jin asked, puzzled, what exactly had just happened. She stood calmly, slightly irritated, as if the question were unnecessary. But then her strength failed her, and she slowly sagged against the wall. He wondered if she'd run out of mana after casting so many spells. Jin couldn't help but notice the awkwardness of her situation and commented on it, but she wearily replied that she was too exhausted from being resurrected 6 times to even move. He never saw any gratitude from her. Shuna, sitting on the floor and looking exhausted, asked for water. He promptly poured it into a cup and handed it to her. She sharply asked if he was going to bill her for the water. Jin confidently asserted that as the owner, he had every right to do so and formally welcomed her to Café de Gare. After that, he announced that, as the owner, he was obligated to provide the establishment with provisions, which meant he would return to the dungeon. The determination in his voice left no doubt. Jin was surprised when she announced she would go with him. Shuna irritably explained that sitting in the room was boring. He reminded her that the monsters had been level 3 last time, and now they could range from level 1 to level 5. However, this challenge seemed too easy for her, unable to even relieve the tension. Then she calmly remarked that for real fun, you needed a level 100 dungeon. Her words sounded almost casual. Jin agreed that a level 100 dungeon would be ideal for entertainment. His gaze regained its usual seriousness. Still, he thought that for true excitement, he'd need a level of 256 or higher, but such places didn't exist. He added that he no longer considered himself an adventurer, and she turned away. The narrative again emphasized that the dungeon gives the challenger exactly what they seek. This principle remained unchanged. Shuna, left alone at the desk with her notes, muttered that the first level was pure trash. Her thoughts were focused on something more serious. Jin called out to her impatiently, asking why she was so lost in thought and taking her time. She quickly responded with a curt yes. Finally, he inquired if it was possible to leave the dungeon immediately after entering. Shuna explained that the structure changed each time and confirmed that the current level had already risen to the second. Jin asked if they should log in again to check the changes. Shuna replied that she would only be satisfied with a level at least twice as high as before. He rated her current score as a 4th and remarked that it was already quite good. However, she stubbornly declared that she was capable of advancing further, adding that honest people succeed on their 3rd try. The girl blushed in response and said she didn't care about the details. Jin calmly reminded her that this was already the 3rd entrance, and the next one would be the 4th. He soon felt a sharp increase in danger, and noted that for a newcomer, this would be a serious risk. Shuna looked at him silently, as if asking how he assessed the situation. Suddenly, she lunged for the door, and Jin called out in surprise, trying to stop her. However, she ignored him and stepped inside. He was surprised to see that the level range had now reached 16, which seemed excessive. Shuna calmly asked if he hadn't noticed this before. Then Jin quickly added up the numbers 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, and realized the level doubled with each entry. This realization made him exclaim that everything was now clear. Shuna suggested trying another experiment, a mischievous glint in her eyes. Her confident smile betrayed her excitement. Soon they found themselves back in the familiar wasteland, reminiscent of their previous visit. She stood beside him, both gazing at the mountainous landscape ahead. Jin felt a powerful pressure. The killing intent was different from before, and his skin prickled. Shuna teased him about fear, but he firmly replied that he had no intention of being afraid. Suddenly, his eyes widened and his mouth dropped open. There was something extremely strong in front of him. He quickly assessed the situation and noted that there were likely several hundred enemies. Shuna excitedly pointed to the sound of wings and asked if he could hear it. They stood shoulder to shoulder, swords at the ready, facing a swarm of giant bees. He noted their numbers while she dryly added that it was getting boring. Jin said he'd distract them while she used her signature skill to incinerate them all at once. She briefly replied that she understood the plan. Crouching down, he followed the movement of the swarm and said that he had gathered them in one place, but at the same time hinted at the problem that had arisen. The next second, he felt a fiery attack aimed at him, and he realized they were going to burn him along with the others. His face tightened, but his resolve didn't fade. Shuna snapped at him to stop being so reckless. He justified himself by saying he'd intentionally reduced the force of his blow to avoid hitting her. Meanwhile, she noticed a huge queen bee dodging the flames and realized that her reaction was not fast enough. Jin knocked down the flying opponent with a powerful punch. Shuna watched with surprise and slight alarm. He gripped the weapon tightly and warned that such actions were dangerous. His gaze was intensely focused ahead, ready for the next step. Jin explained that insectoid creatures were remarkably resilient, and the queen's strength rivaled that of a dragon. However, he had already crushed her stinger, so there was no longer any immediate threat. He then prepared to finish the fight with his signature move, the Traceless Strike, intending to cleave the enemy in one motion. Shuna wasn't expecting such a swift attack and was momentarily taken aback. Meanwhile, she herself struck a blow at the glowing creature with a hard shell, and Jin warned that suddenly heating up such a shell was not the smartest idea. Ignoring the remark, she released a powerful pulse that sent her opponent flying back with a dull groan. Jin yelped, noticing he'd been slightly burned, while she joyfully declared success. He asked her not to be so openly pleased with his burns. Soon he felt the cool touch of her fingers on his burned skin and realized it was healing magic. The sensation was like a stream of holy water flowing through his body. Shuna confidently declared that the task was finished, and Jin raised his fists in approval, noting that everything went exactly as he expected. Afterwards, he asked her to heal his left shoulder, which had been injured when he'd grabbed the sting. She asked, with a hint of mockery, if he could be less demanding. Shuna smiled softly and added that she preferred to receive care herself, rather than give it out endlessly. Jin noted with a serious expression that they were getting along well, and added that he felt the same. A brief pause of mutual understanding ensued between them. At that moment, he sensed the boss approaching. Shuna nodded, noting that the footsteps sounded alarming. She calmly but confidently asked if he could handle such an opponent. There was no doubt in her gaze. Jin thanked her for the magic that made him feel better than usual, but she demanded a more tangible thank you instead of just words. Soon, a furious bull, engulfed in flames, burst forth from the flames and charged forward with devastating force. Its eyes blazed and the ground shook beneath its hooves. Shuna explained that her fire was useless against a fire attribute creature and handed the initiative over to him. Jin countered, noting that the enemy was too hot even for him. Crouching down and holding his weapon tightly, he reminded them that they had already fought killer bees today and suggested they act preemptively. He explained that he channeled magic through his entire body to accelerate to extreme speeds, and that his blades moved so fast that they left an afterglow. According to him, most monsters die from the first blow, and it is the initial attack that determines the outcome of the battle. However, Shuna noticed that the monster had managed to evade his attack. Jin admitted with annoyance that he shouldn't have expected anything less from a level 256 opponent. However, he added that this was precisely what made the problem easier to understand, and his gaze became focused and steady again, ready for the next move. Jin, his gaze focused and stern, realized that an opponent of this caliber was capable of reading his movements. Therefore, he would have to act differently, anticipating his response before it came. He declared that he would deliberately repeat the same attack pattern as before, and without changing his rhythm, he unleashed a fiery and powerful blow on the enemy. The monster dodged with a barely noticeable movement, just as he expected. Jin immediately transitioned to the next phase, hoping to finish the fight with a counterattack. He calmly admitted that this was exactly the outcome he had expected. What had happened was entirely in line with his calculations. Then he let the hilt slide slightly in his palm, extending the blade's trajectory further than the first strike. The blade passed where the enemy no longer had time to correct its movement. Jin forcefully sliced through the tentacles, adding that the loss of one eye would prevent the enemy from tracking attacks from the blind spot. He concentrated to the limit, preparing to pour a colossal amount of mana into the next swing. The air around the blade began to distort. Then he swung the heavy sword down sharply, putting all his determination into the blow. The blade cut through space with a dull sound. He exhaled, feeling relieved. Shuna, standing with her arms crossed, praised him for such a decisive victory. However, Jin grimaced and admitted that he was completely exhausted, his body aching from the strain, his fingers clenched in fatigue. He added that he hadn't noticed the burns during the fight, but now he felt them especially acutely. Shuna noted that the fight had truly been real, without any pretense. Jin immediately asked her to take care of the treatment, but she sharply told him to stop demanding everything. However, he noticed that, despite her grumbling, she was already tending to his wounds. He couldn't help but wonder why she couldn't just do it silently, and he muttered a quiet question. Soon, a pleasant aroma wafted across their faces. Jin remarked on it out loud, and Shuna agreed, adding that the scent seemed to penetrate their very souls. They were surprised to find that the infernal bull had been cooked by its own heat, turning into something like a steak. Jin examined the carcass, and Shuna explained that the fireproof hide remained intact, while the cut meat had browned. She, sweating and amazed, asked if he was really going to eat it. He was kneeling, carefully examining his prize. Jin reminded them that in this world, there is a dish called a whole roasted pig, and compared what was happening to a roasted cow, only on a larger scale. He enthusiastically declared the meat to be first class. Shuna calmly pointed out that he was exaggerating again. When he offered her to try at least a piece, she hesitated, clearly not ready for such a step and feeling inner turmoil. Shuna enthusiastically praised the meat's flavor, and Jin nodded and suggested they take the whole carcass. In his opinion, it would be a sin to leave such a kill in the dungeon. Continuing to eat, he asked what their prize was this time. She calmly replied that the new recipe was for toast. Jin, sweating lightly, asked again if it was difficult at all. He hastened to add that even he could handle toast. Then she listed off the options, with honey, with garlic, and even with avocado. He asked, surprised, if he'd heard correctly about garlic toast. A plate of steak with garlic toast on the side immediately appeared in his mind. He figured that if he served it as a lunch menu, customers would flock to it. Shuna noted that taste will indeed attract people, but price will decide everything. Without a reasonable price, no popularity will last. Jin confidently announced he would set the price for the steak lunch at 600 gudo, comparing his determination to jumping off the 13-meter stage at Kiyomizu. She asked, puzzled, where exactly that place was. The two of them lugged the heavy bulk, discussing the meaning of the word stage. One suggested it referred to a theater, but neither could give a clear answer. Shuna asked for more filet and ribs, and Jin, smiling, declared that he wouldn't mind adding some himself. He encouraged her to eat boldly and not be shy. With easy determination, he admitted that he didn't know anything about butchering, so he would cut the meat as best he could. The main thing was the result. Jin insisted that the meat was perfect with just a touch of the knife. Shuna was surprised to notice that he seemed overly spoiled by his success as they continued eating. At that moment, an elderly man greeted him and announced he had brought coffee and bread. He inhaled the aroma in the room and remarked on how impressive it was, holding a steaming cup in his hand. Another old man in a bandage informed Grandpa Pobik that they would soon start serving steak lunches. He responded by remarking that this sounded quite prestigious. Jin suddenly realized he'd forgotten that food in the dungeon cooked itself. The older man asked why he'd taken so long to cook the meat and what he planned to do with it. He wondered if he could sell the entire volume in a day, since raw meat could be preserved with ice magic, but freezing an already cooked steak would ruin the taste. One of the elders asked if the cafe had officially opened, noting that the village didn't even know it was back. Jin irritably admitted he'd forgotten to announce the opening. He then excitedly announced the grand opening of Café de Gare and offered the Infernal Bowl steak for free, holding a tray with the skewered meat. Shuna cheered the children on, and Jin handed out skewers with a smile. The children raised their hands and demanded more. He introduced Café de Gare and asked for support, still holding the skewers, while the two men behind hesitantly agreed. One of the men asked if this was really the same cafe, while the other confirmed that the establishment had long since closed. A woman stood between them, shashlik in hand, watching the proceedings tensely. Shuna glanced around the building and muttered that it looked creepy. Then she confirmed that it was indeed the Aiba family home. She listened silently as the two men discussed how the structure had suffered serious damage over the years, as if it had been fighting some kind of monster. Shuna tensed as the two older men decided to keep their distance and warn the children, their voices wary. Meanwhile, Jin excitedly informed her that he'd given away every last piece of meat. She nodded with relief, noting that this was encouraging. The next day, the bright sun illuminated the rooftops and the story reminded them of how many steaks they had managed to distribute the day before. However, Jin complained that not a single customer had arrived. Shuna, sipping from a cup at the counter, agreed with his disappointment. Then she unexpectedly suggested they go underground, promising to resurrect him if he died and allowing him to choose any floor. He was surprised by her sudden concern, but assumed it was just her usual manner. Jin wondered why the stern saint was acting so condescendingly. She calmly replied that he could call her whatever he wanted, but he angrily demanded not to call him a saint. At that moment, a timid greeting came from the doorway. He perked up and quickly asked if it was a visitor, immediately inviting the girl inside, recognizing her as yesterday's guest. Jin smiled awkwardly as Shuna politely thanked him for the delicious meat. Another girl stood nearby, a mocking expression on her face. He readily offered to brew excellent coffee when the customer admitted that it was her first time in a cafe. Shuna complained that she couldn't drink coffee because it was bitter, and Jin looked at her with concern. He hesitantly suggested another drink, but she sharply remarked that charging a child for water was a dubious idea, after which she resigned herself to the situation. Shuna offered honey and water on the house and, taking a sip, noted with satisfaction that the drink was sweet and pleasant. Jin was surprised to notice that, with a cooking level of -24, she had managed to make honey with water. She explained that it was originally a medicinal infusion, and if you treat it like medicine, everything works. She smiled as she noted that he had finally managed to open the cafe he'd long dreamed of. He looked away and remained silent. He remembered his childhood, when he couldn't stand the taste of coffee, but still loved the atmosphere of the cafe. He remembered how the aroma seemed too strong at first, but after the first sip, the taste was completely different from the canned drink and incredibly pleasant. Reflecting quietly, he admitted that he wanted to create a place where he could share special joy with others. Jin was about to say something, but suddenly fell silent and looked away tensely, as if he felt something unexpected. He stood in front of the building, looking up at the sign, trying to recall something elusive. The thought swirled at the edge of his consciousness, but it wouldn't take shape. What was it? Meanwhile, Jin held a piece of bread in his hand and remarked that the morning had been unusually pleasant. Breakfast consisted of eggs, bread, and salad, simple but satisfying. He thoughtfully explained to himself that the lack of customers meant that food spoiled faster than it was consumed. He ended up throwing it away, which irritated him especially as he took another bite of bread. He admitted that he was not completely penniless, but at the moment his only stable income was the rent paid by Shuna. Then a disturbing thought struck him. Was he becoming a parasite? The internal question sounded sharp, like a blow to his pride. Jin flushed and declared that it was unacceptable for his pride to live off a fallen saint. After that, he almost pleadingly wished for customers to finally appear in the cafe. He soon noticed that Shuna hadn't come to breakfast as usual. Sitting by the open window, he wondered what this could mean. Jin got up and knocked on her door, asking if she was awake. The thought flashed through his mind that even a saint skilled in healing could sometimes fall ill. Opening the door, he asked with displeasure what had happened to the room. She, only just waking up, sleepily uttered his name. Jin noted with irritation that the room had become a mess in just a few days. Shuna, hiding under the blanket, muttered that cleaning wasn't necessary. He surveyed the scattered clothes and admitted he'd never made such a mess. In response, he received a disgruntled comment about the noise and a wry advice to be grateful for the opportunity to contemplate such a mess. Jin stood on the stairs, arms crossed, and concluded that her untidiness exceeded all his expectations. At that moment, he noticed an approaching figure and suggested out loud that it might be a client. However, the man quickly asked for a break, explaining that his comrade had been stung by a sand scorpion. He supported the wounded man, clearly concerned for him. Jin frowned and realized that these were not customers, but people in need of help. He insisted the injured man lie down and reassured his companion that everything would be fine. The gratitude in the man's eyes reminded him that helping those in need was natural. Jin explained that the sand scorpion isn't a monster, but its venom is extremely potent and can be fatal in some cases. He spoke seriously, not giving up. One of those who came in despair called out to his master and asked if there was a doctor or physician nearby. Jin worriedly thought that there really was no medic in the village. Meanwhile, Shuna excitedly remarked that everything was starting to resemble a real cafe since they were calling her mistress. He sharply asked if they had brought the girl and demanded to know who exactly was inside. A sweaty man nearby watched anxiously, sensing the tension in the air. Jin confidently declared that if a healer was needed, she was up there, and while her gaze might be intimidating, her skill was beyond doubt. His tone suggested he wouldn't allow for any other outcome. He then quickly called out to Shuna, informing her that visitors had arrived and suggesting they come down. She briefly thanked him for the warning. As he climbed the stairs, his gaze involuntarily lingered on the mint green suit that was on display today. He tried to maintain his concentration, as if he were thinking about something else. Suddenly, Shuna screamed Imperial Fire, unleashing a powerful stream of flame. Jin immediately warned that at this rate the shop would be destroyed, and realized the situation was becoming dangerous. He summoned his demonic blade, Hudori, gripping the hilt tightly, determination etched on his face. With a cry of magic flow reverse, he swung his sword, directing the magic in the opposite direction. Jin explained that by channeling mana through Hudori, he could disrupt the spell's activation and effectively mute it. He called it his secret trump card in anti-magic combat, and Shuna was stunned to realize that her flames had vanished. She stood there in her underwear, looking at him awkwardly, while he bowed deeply and loudly apologized for the intrusion. Jin urgently reported that there was a patient downstairs who had been stung by a sand scorpion and was in critical condition, requiring immediate examination. Shuna reluctantly agreed, sighing tensely. She angrily ordered him to leave the room and not interfere, and he, without arguing, hurried away, almost crawling. Below, a dark-haired man apologized for the noise, but a blindfolded woman calmed him down, explaining that they had been promised help. After some time, Shuna announced that the treatment was complete. The bandaged man joyfully reported that he was completely healed. The woman thanked the healer profusely, claiming it was all thanks to her, and Shuna responded with a brief confirmation. Then the man anxiously asked about the price. The girl calmly stated the amount, 6,000 jetto. Shuna handed the bag of payment to the relieved merchants, and Jin noted to himself that they hadn't charged extra for the urgency, the rate was standard. He added that since she was helping with the exploration of the dungeon, there was no need to charge her for accommodation. Shuna firmly objected, stating that she did not engage in such concessions, and ordered him to simply accept the gratitude without further ado. Jin felt awkward, like he looked like a freeloader, but he admitted that was her way of doing things. He asked why the treatment was taking so long, since she usually got it done in no time. She calmly replied that he didn't understand the whole picture. In conclusion, she explained that for holy healing, not only the power but also the delivery is important, because without the proper ritual, the feeling of gratitude disappears. Shuna sternly warned that rumors of a high-ranking saint's presence here could lead to trouble. Jin listened attentively, his gaze hard and focused. Then he cautiously asked if she had come from the Gana temple. She smiled and confirmed that his guess was correct. A radiant Gana temple emerged in my mind, an institution where holy virgins are trained. There, each one becomes a symbol of the temple and an embodiment of Yura, the god of compassion, almost like an idol for the faithful. Shuna remained serious, and Jin, lying and looking at the ceiling, went over the words compassion, temple, idol in his head, trying to understand their true weight. He finally understood why she'd left that place and acknowledged that she'd had a hard time of it herself. She nodded wearily, as if unwilling to go into further detail. Soon the man called out to his owner, who was relieved to note that everything had gone smoothly. His young companion confirmed his words. Jin raised his eyebrows in surprise when the customer admitted that he simply wanted to catch his breath and ordered 3 cups of coffee. He repeated his request for coffee with a tired expression and even said he thought he heard angels singing. His voice sounded on the verge of exhaustion. Shuna sharply told Jin to come to his senses and reminded him that he was the owner of the cafe. He winced, as if he was just now realizing it. He covered his face with his hand, overcome with excitement, and acknowledged that the long-awaited moment had arrived, the first client and the first order. Jin hesitantly ordered 3 coffees, barely containing his emotions, and Shuna calmly assured the stranger that there was nothing to worry about. The owner was just a little out of his mind. He nervously apologized for his behavior, and the other man, wiping sweat from his forehead, remarked that it was difficult to drink calmly under such a close gaze. Jin stood with his arms crossed, unable to calm down, while Shuna watched him from behind the counter. The bandaged guest quietly sipped his drink off to the side. The visitors expressed their gratitude for the treat, their faces lit up with genuine surprise and pleasure from the taste. The man in traditional dress warmly thanked the owner, and Jin peeked out from behind the door, stunned and touched at the same time. He enthusiastically repeated that someone had called the food delicious. Shuna confidently proclaimed her talent, and he dubiously asked if she had done anything at all. She snapped back that she had wiped down what he boiled his coffee in, and he, after thinking about it, admitted that perhaps that was also a contribution. Jin clenched his fist as the narration noted that Café de Gare had finally welcomed its first customer, and the response was promising. He confidently declared that with such a start, the establishment would definitely flourish, while Shuna listened with an even, slightly bored expression. Finally, she reminded him to hurry up and head to the dungeon. He, however, thought the road to popularity would be long and difficult, as no other customers showed up that day. Shuna indifferently declared that visitors wouldn't show up anyway. Jin looked at her tensely, stubbornly determined to prove her wrong, even though in his mind he dismissed her as a fallen saint who said whatever she pleased. He sighed heavily and admitted that, as annoying as the admission was, there was some truth to her words. As they climbed the rocky slope, Jin promised to work hard in the dungeon and stock up on enough food for the cafe. Shuna listened attentively without interrupting. He soon noticed that temple-type dungeons were rare. She remained silent as they stood inside the ancient stone structure, entwined with vines. Her mood had clearly soured, and she openly declared that she didn't like temples. Jin walked behind her, watching her irritation with concern. She pointed out the Kamuri vine and Shitakusa grass in the garden, and he chuckled with interest, memorizing the names. Jin chided her for treating the temple like a regular dungeon. She merely waved her vine carelessly and snorted, not paying any attention to his words. Then she calmly noted that no one comes here anyway, and this place can hardly be considered a real temple. Jin noted that such dungeons allow for the collection of rare medicinal herbs. Shuna perked up and explained that the Kamuri vine is an important component of a universal medicine, suggesting that it be put to good use. He thought that, despite her hopeless cooking, she was truly talented at making potions. She admitted that she enjoyed gathering herbs, but wondered if it was befitting a saint. Shuna briefly wondered what had caused the saint's disciple to flee, but decided not to delve deeper. Despite her harsh tongue, she healed people without self-interest, and then enthusiastically pointed to the silvery flowers nearby. Jin noticed the unicorn and said that he seemed to be the boss of this place. She stood silently nearby. He wondered why a sacred creature was considered a monster. Shuna explained that fallen unicorns were like fallen angels, and their darkness wasn't all that surprising. Jin noticed that she had fallen asleep leaning against his shoulder, and the narration mentioned that the saint's disciple was again muttering something about falling into darkness. He repeated the word unicorn thoughtfully, and a new idea flashed in his eyes. Jin remembered that, according to legend, these creatures love pure and beautiful maidens and fall asleep with their heads in their laps. Shuna sharply called him a pervert. He invited her to sit nearby and try to tranquilize the beast. She playfully admitted that she was beautiful and innocent but still hesitated. The fair-haired girl, playing a role, enticingly invited him to come closer, assuring him that there was no need to be afraid of her. Jin mockingly declared that she didn't even deserve his attention and called her an old hag, which provoked her anger and threats of violence. In the end, he watched as she, seething with anger, tried to overcome the fiery creature with brute force, abandoning her usual magic. Shuna flushed and demanded to know who had dared to call her ugly. Jin stammered, admitting that he had been the one who had uttered those words. He muttered irritably that everything had gone wrong and wondered if it was mating season for these creatures. She responded by calling him a perverted fanatic and adding that such fantasies were disgusting. When she warned him not to approach the beast, he stubbornly declared that he intended to show the creature the difference in level. He clarified with a self-confident smile that a unicorn was not a horse at all, and emphasized this with a playful gesture of his fingers, as if he were shooting. Jin sensed the enemy's fury as he tried to suppress everything he encountered with clean counterattacks. Shuna stood before the multi-headed monster, ready to cover him. A powerful figure stepped toward her, and she clenched her fist, lightning crackling around it. She sharply asked who exactly had called her ugly, and called him a boar. Jin awkwardly added that it was just a blind horse, incapable of seeing beauty. Shuna immediately corrected him, explaining that a unicorn is a sacred beast, not a horse. He noticed movement ahead and said something was approaching. She stood next to him, weapon in hand, focused and serious. Jin noted that anyone would be angry if they were compared to a nag and had to repel every attack. Shuna pointed out that the statue looked offended. He studied the loot scroll carefully, thinking about the unicorn horn as the material for the miraculous Mourinho, and telling himself that he needed to check the description carefully. Shuna asked what a Mourinho was. Jin, lying on his back, explained that it was a tool for whisking hot chocolate. She asked again, and he added that the Mourinho was simply a device for stirring chocolate, albeit a rare one. Jin remembered the name of the kitchen tool as he watched the drink being stirred in the cauldron, while the boy next to him looked on with delight. Shuna was surprised to hear that hot chocolate stirred by Miracle Mourinho tasted incredibly good. Jin doubted whether simple stirring even mattered. She firmly objected, clutching her staff and demanding to know if he truly considered it unimportant. He explained that the horn needed to be mounted on a pedestal and properly processed. She held it thoughtfully, quietly contemplating. Jin gazed excitedly at the miraculous Mourinho and confessed he couldn't wait to make the chocolate. She immediately asked to try it first. He, sweaty and irritated, wondered why she insisted on cooking, given her poor cooking skills. She looked at him with mild displeasure. Shuna declared she would stir first. Jin protested that it wasn't fair as they stood by the open chest on the steps. Under the crescent moon, he warned her that if she touched Mourinho, it might explode. She angrily waved him off, insisting that nothing of the sort would happen. She frowned and asked irritably if he could say that with complete certainty. Shuna stubbornly declared that even if everything exploded, they would simply get a horn from another unicorn. At that very moment, an explosion thundered behind her. Jin and she simultaneously noticed the sky turn red and the air thick with smoke. Jin immediately realized the smoke was rising from the direction of Dogar village. He saw the bandits and firmly declared that the fire had to be put out immediately. Shuna agreed without hesitation and prepared to act. One of the men noted with surprise that it had suddenly started raining and that the drops felt strangely tingling on his skin. Meanwhile, Jin, without losing speed, carried her on his back through the narrow alley. He ordered her to split up and deal with the enemy first. She responded with a resolute agreement. Jin knew her true power was far from fully realized. When she summoned the Flood of Sin, the god Ishikura's magical rain that punishes arrogant people throughout the village, it became clear what she was capable of. Shuna loudly asked if there were any injured and demanded that the injured come to her immediately for treatment. One man, sitting on the ground, inappropriately noticed the presence of a beautiful woman, and the girl next to him sat down and sparks seemed to flash in the air. A burly bandit with a defiant air offered to use her body to solve his problem. She responded with a tense smile. Shuna sharply stated that one could admire their beauty, but their character was worse than any nag. The large man noticed her resistance and called it cute as she held on tightly to his clothes. She coldly told the stone giant that if he were a monster, she would have destroyed him already, but he was lucky to be human. Jin watched from the sidelines, his fists clenched tensely. One of the subordinates informed his leader that some had resisted, but everyone except them had already been neutralized. The leader reminded them that if there was resistance, the children should be dealt with first. The bearded bandit barked an order and swung his sword at the fair-haired figure, while the dark-haired observer watched the scene with cold concentration. Shuna, covered in sweat, thought that the technique, used at full speed, wasn't meant for humans. At that moment, a powerful thud resounded nearby. Jin, with a furious expression on his face, rushed forward with his sword, and the very intent to kill was reflected in his movements. Shuna called out to him in alarm, asking why he was losing his composure and reminding him that he was now the owner of the cafe. She crossed her arms and sternly asked him if he'd made sure he hadn't hurt the child. He quickly denied it, sweating and avoiding her gaze. He then asked about the son of the Aiba family, accusing him of a reckless attack and demanding to know whether he was even human or a monster. Shuna listened calmly, though her eyes were filled with concern. Jin stood among the ruined houses of Dagar and thought that anyone who so easily destroyed buildings and took lives could not be called human. The peaceful village around him only emphasized this realization. He looked at his raised palm in the dark light of the sunset and admitted to himself that a monster was still a monster, even if it lurked in the desert. At that moment, the girl joyfully thanked the cafe owner, holding his hand tightly. He looked down, clearly not expecting such sincerity. Jin sheepishly apologized for startling her, but Shuna cheerfully assured him that everything was fine, adding that he looked really impressive. A man with bruises on his face thanked Mr. Aibu for saving his daughter, while a woman and a smiling girl stood nearby. Jin quickly raised his hands, denying he'd done anything remarkable. He insisted he'd done nothing special. Someone folded their palms in gratitude and said they could offer only a small token of appreciation. The girl explained that the milk was from their farm and added that she had helped out too. Her hand pressed the lid of a large jug to reveal its contents. Shuna enthusiastically suggested making hot chocolate at home. Jin agreed but reminded him they didn't have any cocoa powder. The elderly man bowed and apologized, thanking him for his help, handing over a neatly wrapped package. Jin addressed him as Old Man Pobik, who modestly replied that it was nothing and offered a small gift as a token of his gratitude. Jin accepted it with surprise. He happily announced that it was cocoa powder, and Shuna's eyes widened in surprise. She remarked that it had become cold, and he agreed, adding that the desert nights were indeed piercing. Nearby, two men stood at the corner of the building, one of them saying that the wind was especially strong today. Jin suggested they go home and warm up with hot chocolate, but Shuna was adamant that she wanted to drink it right now. He asked, stunned, if everything was really working out so well. Jin considered the lack of ingredients but quickly remembered they had cooking utensils. He added that all they needed was a pot and a fire. With her eyes closed and a blush on her cheeks, she happily said that she also wanted hot chocolate. Shuna gave the order to the manager with determination, as if to emphasize her seriousness. Jin, full of intent, declared that he would make the best drink, and she sat quietly next to him with a confident smile, while someone else present watched them from the side. He enthusiastically explained the preparation procedure. First, mix the cocoa powder and sugar over low heat, stirring thoroughly, then add a little milk and let the mixture warm thoroughly. Shuna listened calmly, her eyes slightly skeptical. Someone added that this method helps avoid lumps by gently stirring the mixture with a spoon in a bowl. The genie carefully poured in more milk and emphasized that the drink wasn't ready yet. He reminded everyone to heat it carefully, not to bring it to a boil. Shuna confidently declared that the moment had come for the miraculous Mourinho. Her gaze was filled with determination. Jin held up the instrument like a trophy and firmly noted that everything was going exactly as he had expected. He enthusiastically demonstrated how to whip chocolate to a fluffy texture using a unicorn horn. He said it transforms an ordinary drink into a truly wonderful one. 3 steaming mugs appeared in front of them, and an announcement was made that the wonderful hot chocolate was ready. Shuna happily remarked on the thick texture and rich cocoa aroma. Jin admitted the flavor was so rich it was difficult to describe, and the girl enthusiastically called the drink delicious. She offered to make another batch, and he readily agreed. Soon others joined in, inviting their parents to try it too. Jin was asked for more and he nodded, turning to Grandpa Pobik. He awkwardly offered them homemade milk and asked if they could try some. The other man apologized for his earlier words and admitted that he had been the one who had saved them in their time of need. Jin enthusiastically announced the second evening at Café de Gare, while Shuna calmly sipped from a mug, nestled by the fire with her head in someone's lap. She glanced to the side with a slight smile and noticed that there was a lot of trouble with this place. Meanwhile, elsewhere, a woman sat at a table with tea and sweets, wondering if Shuna had been found. The man reported that a recent transfer of captured bandits had taken place in the desert and mentioned a silver-haired healer who had neutralized them with her bare hands. She reacted with obvious interest. Shuna gritted her teeth and declared that only that same girl was capable of such rudeness. The long-haired figure announced that the fugitive had finally been found after the shame brought upon the family and ordered Roger R. to gather mercenaries. She clenched her fist firmly and declared that she would even force Shuna back to the Gana temple. Meanwhile, Jin was examining the dungeon's type and level. She called it mediocre and suggested they try again, but he replied that it was too much trouble and that the current result was sufficient. He added that he was not in the mood for a serious raid today and would be pleased if they managed to find something useful. Jin chuckled and explained that it was like going to a 100-yen store. You walk in with no expectations, but you still find something useful. Shuna immediately asked what the currency even meant, and he awkwardly admitted it was difficult to explain. After several repeated visits, he began to grasp the dungeon's patterns. Meanwhile, she was examining the strange plant with keen interest, as if about to dismantle it. The narrative noted that a dungeon type called the Wasteland was teeming with bestial monsters. A massive deer-like creature loomed against the mountainous backdrop. The forest section then revealed a multitude of plant monsters, a pumpkin-headed creature, and other sinister forms of flora. The commentary emphasized that there were many such creatures here. The text explained that since both animals and plants could be edible, either type of dungeon was suitable for gathering ingredients. A long-haired figure knelt before a small altar surrounded by fiery spirits. It was mentioned that the temple sector was especially dense with spirit beings today. One of the spirits screamed piercingly, and the narrative again reminded us of the nature of these creatures. Jin explained that spirit bodies disappear after death and are unfit for consumption, but they often drop recipes. Shuna narrowed her eyes thoughtfully at the mention of red boar fat pudding. He calmly added that he was not inspired by small opponents and mentioned the fried slices of the black-cloaked octopus king while examining the scroll in his hand. Jin wondered if a sea dungeon existed since they were talking about an octopus. Shuna admitted she'd never encountered one and noted that even with the recipe, they didn't have the necessary ingredients. He suggested that they seriously pursue collecting rare components in the future. She listened confidently and without objection. Later, Jin, looking rather battered, sat leaning against the wall, his gaze weary but determined. The title of Rusty Iron Fallen Angel loomed ominously above them. He asked if it was really an angel. She clarified that it was only a low-ranking fallen angel. Shuna insisted he take charge of the fight and asked him to put in more effort. Jin looked tense and slightly sweaty. Leaning on her hand, she admitted that she felt sympathy for the fallen angels and internally struggled with thoughts of gods and temples. Jin called her a fallen saint, and she responded by slamming her palms on the table in irritation. He asked sharply what would happen if she died. She confidently replied that she would use resurrection. Jin smiled warmly and said that everything was fine then, but he immediately flared up and declared that this was completely unnatural, calling her reasoning pointless. She countered that dodging his lightning of justice with her bare eyes was in itself abnormal. Finally, Jin explained that the dungeon boss had been destroyed by the backlash of his own lightning of justice, while Shuna listened intently from further down the slope. He glanced briefly at the fallen angel statue and thought it was probably dissatisfied with its ignominious ending. Then he reached for the treasure chest, while Shuna watched from the sidelines. Upon learning that a sugar called Angel's Tears made coffee and tea tastier, Jin enthusiastically suggested that it be used in the cafe immediately. He proudly held up the teapot and declared that the boss's loot brought Cafe Dagar closer to its true style. Meanwhile, Shuna read the item's description and announced that it was a guide to making slime tapioca. Jin asked in surprise if blue slug was really used as an ingredient. She nodded and pointed out that the instructions specifically said to use blue slug. Shuna cast the icy smile of Exis spell with concentration, and a cold vortex swirled around her as a confident smile appeared on her face. Jin explained that anyone who sees the smile of Exis, the angel who heralds death, will feel an icy chill in their heart. He then asked if this would serve their purpose, and she listened calmly, oblivious to the mention of freezing. He went on to explain that at minus 60 degrees, the ingredient becomes elastic and stringy. Shuna remarked skeptically that she found it hard to imagine. She urged him to hurry and finish the job at home. Jin lifted a large stone over his head with determination, preparing for the next step. Shuna asked what tapioca tasted like, and he confidently replied that it was better to see for yourself, continuing to cook something at the counter. Jin studied the book and announced that it all boiled down to slicing a frozen blue slug with a knife at a rate of 16 times per second. His gaze was focused. Despite his lack of culinary skills, he was eager to help. Shuna, however, insisted that he simply observe, considering the process simple enough. Jin admitted he hadn't trained in knife work, but insisted he was still a swordsman. He gripped the knife handle with determination. He confidently declared that he could handle it as sharp shards of ice flashed around him, forming a protective barrier. The blue slug gradually darkened and took on the appearance of real tapioca. He realized that this was how he achieved the desired result. Jin indicated that the preparation now needed to be rinsed in cold water, holding the sieve with extreme care. Someone explained that milk tea is made with goat's milk and strong tea, and the addition of Angel's Tears adds sweetness and depth of flavor. The mixture was then cooled with ice magic, and the ingredients were combined to create a slime tapioca with milk tea. Jin suggested serving the drink with a spoon instead of a straw, and Shuna enthusiastically urged him to try it immediately. He took a sip and remarked that the drink perfectly matched the viscous texture. Impressed, she declared the taste excellent and finally understood what that elasticity meant. In conclusion, Jin confidently declared that the result was good enough to serve to clients without shame and decisively knocked on the table, confirming his intention. He enthusiastically presented his signature dish, declaring it to be a signature dish unique to Cafe Dagar. Shuna tried it and remarked that it was surprisingly tasty for his hands, adding that he should cook for himself more often. Jin took a sip of his milk tea and said it paired perfectly with tapioca. She exclaimed, her eyes sparkling, that it was delicious and wondered if that's what they call a firm texture. He confidently pointed to the drink and declared that it could now be served to customers without shame. With the same enthusiasm, he again emphasized that this was the original menu of Cafe Dagar, while Shuna calmly advised him to try it for himself, repeating that the taste was pleasantly surprising. He sarcastically called the place seedy, and she, standing next to him with a confident smile, welcomed him to Cafe Dagar. Jin quickly apologized and asked the guest what he would like to order. The visitor was surprised, and Jin himself thought that his dream of a quiet and cozy cafe might be naive. He awkwardly admitted that the selection was still far from ideal, and agreed that it was difficult to meet high expectations in such a remote place. He briefly inquired whether his interlocutor was from the same field. The long-haired man explained that their visit resembled a reconnaissance mission and mentioned that they had just created their own signature dish. A group of silent figures stood in the shadows below. The boy in the cap asked what kind of drink it was, admitting he'd never heard of it. Jin assumed he'd noticed the new thing and decided to impress. He enthusiastically began to explain that slime tapioca starts with a blue slug, pointing with his hand and describing the process. Jin suggested just trying it because it would take too long to explain. Shuna called him a fool but admitted it tasted good, and someone loudly demanded more details. Wearing an apron, he served a glass of slime tapioca with milk tea to the stunned man, who hesitantly agreed to try it. Jin looked at the dark balls and wondered if they resembled frog eggs, admitting that he had never encountered anything like that before. He was surprised by the unusual texture and asked if it was jelly. He then suggested that sugar syrup was used, noting that the sweetness was light and almost heavenly. He noticed Shun's reaction and realized the taste exceeded even her expectations. She chuckled softly, closing her eyes. He offered to do the dishes, adding that he'd learn not to stare at people too hard. He then asked her to help, but she declined, reminding him that she was a customer. Jin countered that he'd only allowed her to drink tapioca, not freeze the slug. Shuna denied any involvement, and their argument took on an almost playful tone. He sternly declared that she'd overdone the freezing and made his job more difficult, so he should wash the dishes as an apology. She replied that he wasn't very good at magic, but he loved big words. The young man looked closely at the glass of slime tapioca, admitting that it was truly impressive, as he rarely praised anyone. Jin flared up and sharply demanded that they stop calling him a saint, while Shuna coldly warned the smirking man not to expect her holy blow to affect him. He, in turn, asked with a provocative grin if they wanted to try his icy smile too. He angrily ordered them to stop flirting in front of the client, then declared that he didn't remember any bakaban. The other man responded indignantly, demanding to know who had called him a fool, and emphasized that it wasn't bakaban at all. Jin noticed that in its frozen and elastic state it did indeed resemble a slug, and Shuna raised her hands nervously, as if something was bothering her. Meanwhile, the man angrily scolded both of them for their rudeness and demanded that they at least remember his name, proudly introducing himself as the brilliant chef Doga Zaccaroni. Jin and Shuna looked at each other seriously, then she firmly denied something, and he admitted that he was hearing about it for the first time. The dark-haired chef in the hat passionately declared himself the owner and head chef of the restaurant Gorgeous Montmorency, repeating the name Doga Zaccaroni with disbelief. Jin was surprised that the owner of such a remote establishment, Gomon, was unknown to anyone, but he strictly forbade anyone to arbitrarily shorten the name Gorgeous Montmorency. He explained that he had been cooking for the nobility at the invitation of the royal family of the Red Moon Kingdom, and Shuna remarked that working abroad must be difficult, since there were people all over the world who wanted to try his cuisine. Jin suddenly demanded a meat dish for himself, and she irritably told him to stop talking nonsense, while the third party watched with a smug smile. The young chef declared with determination that his services were worth 10 million geta. He winced inwardly at the rudeness of those around him, but admitted that the chef's skill was truly top-notch, since there were those willing to pay such sums. Jin stood there with a confused look, as if a question mark had appeared above his head, and his interlocutor awkwardly began to add something, stumbling. He suddenly insistently asked to be taught how to cook tapioca, almost begging to reveal the secret, causing the cook to lean forward in amazement. Jin firmly stated that he would not give anything away for free, but was willing to exchange and teach one of his signature recipes. He agreed without hesitation, and Shuna asked in surprise if everything was really that simple. Jin doubted the ease of the deal, but she confidently noted that it was not the dish itself that was valuable, but the understanding of its essence, and a serious exchange of glances arose between them. He enthusiastically began to explain that first it was necessary to prepare a blue slug frozen at -60 degrees. Jin added that normal ice magic wouldn't work and suggested using the Death Blizzard spell, to which Shuna was surprised by the temperature required. He hastened to reassure her, clarifying that in their establishment they made do with the smile of the Ice Angel of Death, and that was quite sufficient. In conclusion, Jin confidently concluded that after a certain level everything becomes simple, and Shuna blushed slightly, looking away as if she was offended. He eagerly ordered her to make 16 cuts per second, and they both concentrated on the precision of their movements, trying not to lose their rhythm. Shuna confidently noted that few chefs could slice a slug so quickly, adding that it could very well become Café de Gare's signature dish. Jin listened with surprise, as if he were just approaching the idea from this angle for the first time. He said that all that was left was to rinse the piece with water to finish, but she suddenly turned pale and asked if everything was okay with him. The girl politely apologized and walked away, and Jin asked if she needed to go out, noticing that something was clearly wrong. He wondered if it was even possible to maintain 16 cuts per second, even if he hired a mage. Meanwhile, a voice thanking him for his cooperation sounded in the background. Jin clenched his fist and decided that Café de Gare was a terrifying sight, promising himself that he would definitely return to this idea and bring it to perfection. Suddenly, he remembered and admitted that he never received that special recipe. Shuna calmly assured him that only he could reproduce it anyway, and he agreed, admitting she was right. He explained that he was not a chef, capable of creating dishes for 10 million get, but that running a cafe in the middle of the desert was exactly what he needed. When she asked for another tapioca with milk tea, reminding her that she was still a customer, Jin agreed to wash the dishes. In the cemetery's labyrinth, he felt a sense of unease, noticing that the monsters appearing were undead. The thought of devouring humanoids or the dead filled him with disgust, especially when zombies began to stir behind him. Jin urged Shuna to stop being distracted and use holy magic to clear the area of Wang Kar, the approaching undead, encouraging her to do it properly. She summoned cleansing flames, reducing the zombies to ash, demonstrating her mastery against the undead. He thought he could have done the same, but he couldn't replicate such exquisite work. Sitting by the grave, Jin noticed that coins were placed for the greedy, bones for the hungry, and the pornography found hinted at the deceased's violent temper. Shuna gritted her teeth and pressed her back against the cracked wall, silently cursing the circumstances. Jin guessed that the final opponent would be a giant skeleton, and giants are known to be resistant to magic. She considered this and began to formulate a response. Shuna raised her hands, gathering powerful magical energy above herself, and declared that she would blow away the enemy with an even more powerful spell. Jin realized that she had deliberately moved the fight into close combat, depriving the enemy of the opportunity to freely use magic. He intervened irritably, demanding to know why she had decided to fight with her bare hands, and at the same time delivered a decisive blow. Jin explained that magic is weaker on giants due to its weakening effect, but it is covered with many protective spells that reduce this disadvantage. Shuna, gritting her teeth and steeling herself, declared that her limit had been reached faster than she had expected and took a stance, preparing for the next stage of the fight. Jin shouted that it was time to change positions and swung his flaming blade as she quickly slid underneath him, her gaze still determined. Shuna quickly warned him not to make decisions alone, her voice filled with both worry and firmness. She sat down on a piece of wall, crossing her arms, and noted with a grin that he should have acted faster. Shuna, covered in sweat, thought that the boss of the 62nd floor of the labyrinth shouldn't be so difficult for her. Meanwhile, the narrative emphasized that despite the enemy's impressive appearance, not a single blow actually hit its target, and its characteristics only seemed frightening. Jin noted that the enemy's movements were too much of a waste of movement, while Shuna concentrated, causing rock debris to hover around her. It was reminiscent of Jin himself holding back his strength in battle. She realized that the skeleton's true power was hidden deeper in the labyrinth, and wondered why it would lower its parameters and appear at a low level while it stood facing the towering remains. Jin, shrouded in shadow, admitted that he desired this fight, marveling at how, even in death, his opponent retained the will to perfect his sword. He confidently assumed that he had been a legendary swordsman in life, and the seriousness of this conclusion was felt in his gaze. Jin rushed into the attack furiously and declared that as a swordsman he had no right to give in. Before them towered a gigantic skull with sharp teeth, a former great swordsman who never achieved glory and sank into oblivion. Jin remembered how magical energy pierced the enemy's body, coinciding with his swift attack, and how the counterattack was so powerful that his palms still tingled. He noted with bitterness that in front of him was not just an insect with a hard shell, nor an animal driven by instinct. Their blades clashed in midair, and a duel of skill and technique unfolded between them. He mentally went through his body movements, his footwork, his breathing, as if he were living the fight before it even started, preparing to put everything into the next step. With determination, he repeated to himself that he was capable of becoming stronger, that his strength could grow again and again. Shuna shouted angrily at him to stop playing around, finish the fight quickly, and then make her tapioca with milk tea. He, sweating and smiling nervously, noticed that she didn't change at all, even with the ominous skeleton looming behind her. Jin apologized, identified himself as the owner of the cafe, and, looking at his opponent, decided to end this as quickly as possible, since customers were already waiting for him. He understood that any superficial poise would be repelled, and his finishing move, Shadow Traceless Slash, required time to build up its power. He even felt a little sorry for his opponent, but he saw no opportunity to use the technique. Jin, with a fierce gaze, declared that he would crush the enemy with all his might and cut him down without hesitation. He offered to meet again with a decisive smile, somewhere around the 400th level, while the smoke was still hanging around. Jin confidently told the skeleton that next time they would both give it their all, gripping the sword tightly. Shuna asked with a slight mockery why he was the only one enjoying it, then laughed and admitted that perhaps it was her fault. She noted with delight that the chest was incredibly huge, and Jin stared in amazement, trying to comprehend what he saw. He instinctively intercepted and stopped the decorated object flying towards him, involuntarily exclaiming in surprise. Jin picked up a giant bottle of sake and pondered its contents, and Shuna explained that it was the famous nectar liqueur, which is good, neat, diluted with ice and in cocktails. Holding the massive barrel, he remembered that giants always appreciated strong drink, and with gratitude decided to accept the gift, while the statue of the giant towered behind him. Shuna noticed that the cafe's menu had been expanded with another drink, and then added that the instructions also included a recipe for a dish called Macedonia, and Jin listened attentively. He explained that Macedonia is chopped fruit mixed with sugar and alcohol. She remarked that it sounded sophisticated, but asked if there was fruit in Dagar, to which he honestly replied, no. Jin clarified that fruit on the desert's edge is prohibitively expensive, and even Popik's shop doesn't stock it. Shuna added that both Angel's Tears and Nectar are already elite products. He suggested they look for a forest-type labyrinth, but she was surprised and instead suggested they go back and try the drink. Suddenly, Shuna announced that there were about 20 armed men in Dagar, and her face tensed. Jin wondered aloud if they were bandits seeking revenge, or perhaps mercenaries from the kingdom. She listened silently, her arms crossed. He explained that the woman was his older sister, Silna, noting that she was attractive but had a difficult personality. Shuna looked slightly worried. The determined woman declared she had finally found her and asked if he understood how worried his parents were. He asked, surprised, if it wasn't her older sister. Shuna lashed out, speaking of the shame it would bring upon the family, but Jin firmly stated that the reputation of the Payet family did not concern him and was not his concern. The young man recalled how, at the age of 10, he was sent to the temple, and admitted that he felt neither any particular attachment to his parents, nor pride in his family name. Shuna insisted that it was not too late to fix everything, and urged him to return with her to the Temple of Ghana, promising that her position as a saint would be secured. She sharply asked why this deadline was even set, and then firmly stated that she did not intend to become someone like that, adding that she did not understand whether there were only madmen around. Shuna flushed and called Jin a fool, demanding to know if he understood what it meant to be a saint, one admired by everyone. After this, she told her sister that she should take that place herself. Shuna coldly pointed out that such a position could not be achieved simply by desire, calling it a venomous attack, and Jin thought that there was no point in forcing someone who did not want it. She raised her hand sharply and warned that she would drag them back by force if necessary, while armored fighters lined up silently behind her. One of the mercenaries quietly wondered if they were underestimating her, or if the family simply did not realize her true strength, since there were 24 armed men standing behind them. Jin called out to her, but she firmly refused help, declaring that after the labyrinth she was left unsatisfied and would deal with them herself. He noticed that Shuna was calling her parents father and mother, hinting at her worthy origins, but she cut him off abruptly, ordering him to stop such idle talk. The man in the turban asked if the young lady and the man standing next to her were indeed the targets. The determined woman ordered to act quickly and capture Shuna, adding that a few wounds were acceptable. The warrior in armor firmly stated that they would return the money, but they did not intend to continue the plan in this form. Shuna objected that there was only one girl in front of them, even as she was a candidate for sainthood, but the man reminded them that they were ordered to return the Viscount's daughter. Jin looked up in surprise when someone off-camera reminded them that they hadn't been warned about meeting Traceless Jin. He spotted a man in the crowd who recognized him and realized that there was someone here who knew his past. Jin looked dumbfounded, and Shuna seriously asked who he really was, uttering the nickname Traceless. He proudly announced himself as the owner of Café Dagar and pointed to the building, while she calmly added that she was simply living there at the owner's expense and remained a customer. Someone wondered if it was the owner in front of them, noticing the similarity of her facial expression with Shuna and assuming that they really were sisters. The armored warrior angrily insisted that he was just a cafe owner, but she confidently retorted that he was the greatest swordsman in the kingdom and asked what they had to fear. Two figures in the shadows were discussing that someone had disappeared from the royal capital quite some time ago, wondering why he had ended up in such a place. Jin sharply ordered them to stop whining and take action, demanding that they be captured, while Shuna watched calmly but seriously, the tension between the two sides noticeably thickening. He asked her what she planned to do now that her location had been revealed. She calmly replied that if anyone tried to drag her back, she would simply chase them away. Shuna confidently added that she had nowhere else to go and no reason to go, while Jin looked at her from behind with a serious gaze, as if trying to understand her final decision. He said he would rather run around the area than get into the labyrinths with her again, and she stood by the building without turning around, maintaining a stubborn silence. Jin eventually decided to make tapioca with milk tea, and Shuna, leaning against the doorway, suggested adding some nectar and turning the drink into a cocktail.